Tim Twigg is the president of Bent Erickson Associates, which has been the leading authority in human resources and personnel management in the healthcare industry, helping dentists successfully deal with the ever-changing and complex labor laws. Tim brings over 30 years of practice management and business consulting experience and knowledge specifically in the healthcare field. Tim's expertise extends to leadership and business development, strategic planning and marketing, and communication skills. He has presented seminars nationally on practice management, human resources, and employment compliance. Please welcome Tim Twigg.
Thanks so much, Alex. So as Alex was saying, this is webinar number 2 of a 3-part series, and it's all on successful recruiting. And you can see by that slide right there that doing a better job in the hiring and the recruiting process is like putting money in the bank. And you've all heard about the cost of turnover, which we'll talk about a little bit more tonight, as well as the other emotional impacts that happen on a practice when there is turnover. Now, relative specifically to those costs and that emotional turnover, or the emotional toll with that, one is the stress and the strain. Because you see, when there's turnover, who there in the practice picks up the slack? Well, it's the people who are still there. And all of a sudden, some people are doing double duty and some might be doing triple duty. And depending upon how much turnover that a practice experiences, and depending upon how long it takes to fill a position, then morale can certainly suffer. And of course, then there's the piece about how long it takes for a brand new employee to be fully up to speed in the practice. The studies and the estimates are that when you hire someone, on average, it takes 4 to 6 months for this person to be fully up to speed. And what that means, of course, is that the practice for that 4 to 6 month period is not operating on all cylinders. And the impact to any practice when things aren't happening on all cylinders is, again, some of the just stress and the strain and the suffering a little bit with morale. There is also a financial toll that is associated with turnover. And one of those aspects is the recruiting cost. Now, whether this is fees paid to an agency, whether this is fees paid to a temp agency service also because we can't find someone in a quick amount of time, so we're paying for some temps. The placement of ads can also represent recruitment costs. And then, of course, there's the time involved, because someone is reading resumes, someone is screening people on the phone, and then the various people who may be involved in the interviewing and then checking references. And all of this represents time, and there's a cost associated with that. Now, interestingly enough, sometimes when I'm talking to dentists about this, they'll say, oh, well, that doesn't cost me anything at all, because I just do it at night, at home, in my spare time. Well, of course, my answer to that is it still has a cost, and what it's costing you basically is your life. Because the reality is, I think everyone would say they have some things they would much rather be doing with their time and their energy than sitting around reading a whole bunch of resumes. And during this 4 to 6 month period of time, while we're waiting for everything to settle back down and everyone to be all on the same page and up to speed, there's typically an impact that happens with the production. Now, just to give you an example, I'm just going to pull a number out of the air. Let's just say we have a practice and the practice is producing $60,000 a month. And now during this 4 month period of time, instead of doing $60,000 a month, the practice is only doing, say, $55,000. So it's a $5,000 nick that's happening to production just because we're not operating on all cylinders. Maybe recall calls aren't being made as quickly or efficiently or effectively as they could. Maybe the money's not being collected quite as readily, or the schedule is not quite as full because we're still working on getting someone up to speed and trained. Well, if my production is down by $5,000 a month for 4 months on average, that's $20,000. And obviously, if my production takes a nick of $5,000 a month for 6 months, then that's $30,000. And so you can see that the financial impact starts to add up and can get to be pretty significant. And of course, anytime we have some turnover, then there is the risks of labor-related issues, and whether that's unemployment claims or the worst-case scenario of some sort of labor board complaint for an unfair termination or a discrimination claim or a failure to pay overtime because this person who potentially was terminated is feeling disgruntled or mad or angry. Another way for you to look at this is the hiring expense becomes the hiring costs, and those are a lot of the costs we just talked about, the recruitment fees, and then there's the training costs when we get someone new on board, because there may be some CE that we need to invest in, or we need to work with this person on the successful utilization of the computer system you have, or pouring up models to just your specifications. There can be termination costs if we've let someone go. Again, these can be unemployment claims. These can also be things like providing someone with 2 weeks of pay or a severance type agreement. And as we just said, there's the potential impact on production. So this becomes additive, the hiring expense. And the studies indicate that this cost can be easily equal to or exceed whatever you pay for that position for a year. And another way to look at this is to say, well, what about the cost per hire? Well, of course, if we take that hiring expense from up above on the screen and now we divide it by the number of employees hired in some period of time, now I have it even broken down to a cost per hiring one particular employee. And the reality is these become significant. So there is certainly a lot of value and a lot of benefit to everyone in the practice of reducing the turnover. And of course, to do that, we need better hiring practices, and that means we're going to increase our hiring success. It supports our ability to identify and attract quality people. If we know how to do a better job with interviewing and increase our skills in this regard, we can reduce some of the hours that are spent involved in that. If we do a better job at picking the right person to be on the bus and in the right seat on the bus, we can also reduce our training costs. All of this additive result means we've got lower turnover and, of course, the expenses that we just talked about. And it means we get to reduce the potential problems, and the end result of that with stability and retention among the team is we improve the service to patients. Now, one hiring pearl that I want to give you, and I know that I mentioned this in our first seminar or first webinar also, and that is I want you to think about this hiring process, particularly out on the front end, as a process of elimination. See, if I gave you 20 resumes and I said, would you please go through these resumes and pick the best person out of these 20 for us to hire, I believe that would be a challenging task, because we're going to look and we're going to see, oh, look at all these people have Dentrix experience, or look, all these people have some expertise in this or that. It becomes difficult to select like the one perfect person out of, say, 20 resumes. But alternatively, if I said to you, here are 20 resumes, I want you to go through these, and I want you to eliminate the ones that clearly don't fit. Eliminate the ones that absolutely, for whatever reason, their past knowledge, their experience, maybe there's someone who is going to be doing some treatment consultation and some reporting back to referring docs, and there's a lot of misspelled words on this resume. But whatever the criteria is, it's a whole lot easier for you to take these 20 resumes and eliminate the people who clearly don't fit for you. And then we've winnowed this down from 20, maybe downward to 6 or 8. And 6 or 8 is a much more manageable and workable size of resumes to then start to drill down. In terms of drilling down, let's talk about the #1 mistake that we find that dental offices make, and that is hiring based on a person's skills and a person's experience, where alternatively what we really want you focusing on is hiring first based on a person's fit within the practice and their attitude. See, a saying with all of this is that you should be hiring for the things you cannot train. See, we can train people how to run the computer. We can train people how to take x-rays. We can train people how to sterilize instruments, but we can't teach attitude. And so it is so important to focus first on fit and attitude, and then if it turns out that this person comes with some experience that works for you, well, then you have to view that more as extra credit, but not as a precondition of even considering this person for the position. Now, where does this whole thing about recruiting fit into the overall puzzle of human resources? Well, we start with a solid foundation. That solid foundation is made up of job descriptions, a personnel policy manual, employee handbooks, and personnel forms. And that's really to cast the solid foundation from which to build. The second layer, so to speak, after we've got a solid foundation in place, is this piece about recruiting. And recruiting is made up of these 7 steps or 7 components. In our first webinar, we covered the first 3. Tonight, our focus is going to be on number 4, the interview. And then webinar number 3, we're going to focus on the last 3 of job match and selection, skills assessment, and reference and background checking. Another key component associated with successful human resources is then performance management. Because you see, if we've got a solid foundation in place, if now we do a better job at recruiting, so we got the right people on the bus, and we got them in the right seats on the bus, well, now our focus becomes effective and productive performance management. And that's so that we really get to work from being just a group of individuals to truly being a highly functioning team. And of course, components there can be everything from bonus and incentive plans and appreciation in the workplace, so that we get people who all now have a vested interest in the long-term success of the practice. And of course, the other component with successful HR is making sure that as rules and laws and requirements change, that you're staying up to date and current. And that can be access to some support, making sure that all of the information is specific for your state, given the employee thresholds that exist, and also on the federal side. So as I mentioned, our focus for this webinar series is the recruitment component of this, and tonight our focus is going to be on the interview specifically.